The moment Hamilton slid into that signature red cockpit, fans expected a glorious new chapter for Ferrari. Instead, what they got was confusion, missed chances, and a harsh reminder that old habits die hard. How could a team boasting the world's most celebrated racing brand and a 7-time champion at the helm fall so spectacularly short in a race that seemed ripe for a podium? Buckle up, because the story of Ferrari's meltdown in Melbourne is more than just another bungled weekend. It's a warning that there may be deeper trouble brewing under that shiny red paint, and a question of whether Hamilton has what it takes to fix it. For anyone who tuned in to the Australian Grand Prix expecting a triumphant Ferrari comeback, the result felt like a splash of cold water. After all the pre-season hype, the team limped home with P8 and P10, a far cry from the double podium many believed was within reach. On paper, the car looked competitive enough to at least battle for the top 3. In reality, a mashup of strategy errors, driver missteps, and unpredictable weather conditions sent the Italian camp spiralling into damage control. It all went off the rails once the wet patches on track began dictating strategy calls that demanded razor-sharp timing. Ferrari's pit wall, however, seemed to be speaking 2 different languages. One telling Hamilton the rain was about to fade, another telling Leclerc it was about to intensify. You could feel the tension creeping in as both drivers wrestled with contradictory orders and watched other teams make decisive moves. That tense atmosphere only foreshadowed what was to come, a missed opportunity that would leave everyone in red feeling bitter. For Hamilton, a 7-time champion used to fine-tuned clarity and reliable data, Ferrari's conflicting messages were a shock to the system. When you're threading a multi-million-dollar machine around a slick racetrack, every piece of communication counts, and it seemed like the pit wall was out of sync. One moment, Hamilton heard the rain wouldn't last. The next moment, Leclerc was being warned that conditions would worsen significantly. It didn't help that Hamilton was also adjusting to entirely new systems, from engine modes to specialized steering wheel setups. He'd publicly acknowledged that there'd be a learning curve, but it's safe to say no one anticipated this level of confusion. His frustration burst into the open on team radio, where he couldn't conceal his disbelief at the calls, or lack thereof, about impending rainfall. While it's not unusual for a driver to vent, it's telling when someone with Hamilton's experience and calm demeanour starts openly questioning the information he's getting. Was it a minor hiccup in the bigger picture of a long season? Possibly. But in Formula One, minor hiccups often snowball into major problems, especially for a team aiming to dethrone the unstoppable Red Bull, dethrone the surging McLarens, and prove it can still win championships. The first few races often set the tone for the year. If this meltdown is anything to go by, Ferrari might be facing a season overshadowed by shaky communication, strategic blind spots, and fracturing morale. The mixed messages that dogged Hamilton weren't isolated incidents. Leclerc, too, found himself receiving contradictory instructions about the weather forecast. While one voice reassured him the rain would hold off, another warned it was only going to get worse. In those chaotic final laps, Ferrari lost its chance to respond effectively. Other teams seized the moment to switch tyres and gain track position, leaving Ferrari to fend for itself on mismatched information. This kind of confusion doesn't just cost points, it fractures trust. If drivers can't rely on real-time updates, they're essentially racing blind. For a squad with championship ambitions, that's a recipe for disaster. To make matters worse, Ferrari actually had the raw pace to threaten for a podium. The McLarens were dominant, but the second and third steps on the rostrum were within reach, especially once the rain started shaking up the order. A timely pit stop or a well-timed switch to intermediates could have netted a haul of points. Instead, the team fumbled every critical moment. By the time drivers found the right tyres or realised slicks wouldn't work, it was too late. Leclerc's mistake exiting turn 11 cost him precious positions, and Hamilton's shot at the lead faded away under slow decisions and scrambled strategy. For Hamilton, this isn't just another season. He's chasing a historic 8th championship, and many believe that joining Ferrari would unlock a new era of dominance. Yet the first brush with adversity revealed a pit wall in disarray. Hamilton's repeated calls for clarity went unanswered at vital junctures, leaving him to navigate unfamiliar setups in the worst possible weather. He may be one of the greatest drivers of all time, but even Hamilton can't overcome a lack of coordination from the team. His measured criticism after the race highlighted the communication flaws. What was billed as a dream pairing Hamilton's expertise and Ferrari's heritage, now hinges on whether the rest of the organisation can match his high standards. Old-school fans have seen this movie before. Ferrari's long history of baffling strategy calls and last-minute misjudgments has derailed more than a few seasons. From questionable tyre gambles to contradictory radio messages, the team's Achilles' heel has often been its own decision-making process. The meltdown in Melbourne carries unsettling echoes of those past failures. Critics argue that, despite roster changes and technology upgrades, Ferrari's internal structure remains too convoluted. Office politics, cultural traditions, and fragmented communication can all derail even the best-laid plans. The hope was that Hamilton's arrival would jolt the system, but a single race weekend showed the old gremlins are far from gone. Which brings us to the real question: does Hamilton have enough influence to steer this proud, yet historically stubborn organisation in a new direction? One driver, however extraordinary, can't overhaul a team's entire ethos overnight. Trust needs to be rebuilt and communication streamlined, all while fighting for precious points against high-performing rivals like McLaren and Red Bull. Still, Hamilton has a reputation for demanding excellence and pushing for the best resources. If Ferrari listens, and if the pit wall embraces reform, it's possible the team's fortunes will shift. But time is ticking, and every weekend, lost to internal strife, only boosts the confidence of their competitors. The pressure to deliver quick results is high, and the next few races could determine whether Hamilton's Ferrari tenure becomes a legendary success or a cautionary tale. In the end, Ferrari's troubles in Melbourne serve as a wake-up call. For a team aiming to dethrone everyone from Red Bull to McLaren, there's no room for muddled messages or half measures. Melbourne could have been a triumphant statement, a reminder that Ferrari was back in the game. Instead, it exposed the organisation's deepest flaws. Hamilton, for his part, won't stay silent if these issues persist. He's built a career on demanding excellence from his machinery and his team. And that expectation doesn't vanish just because he switched to red. The question is whether Ferrari can align with that standard. Can they shift their culture in time to salvage the season? Or will they remain haunted by the same pitfalls that have derailed previous campaigns? The reality is that one race won't define the entire year, but first impressions are powerful. If Ferrari doesn't learn from the mistakes on display in Melbourne, bigger heartbreak may loom on the horizon. Hamilton will push for changes, no doubt about that. But whether those changes take root depends on how serious Ferrari is about leaving past patterns behind. Until we see them roll out a more synchronised effort, it's anyone's guess whether the prancing horse can truly gallop ahead or remain stuck in the same old rut. Let's hear what you think. Is Hamilton the missing piece that can tame Ferrari's chaos, or is this proud team simply too set in its ways to follow new leadership? Let us know in the comments below.